Pop-Up Theatre presents Factual Fiction, the Sherlock Holmes series. Hosted by Alexandria Tan.
Hello and welcome to Pop-Up Theatre's Factual Fiction, the Sherlock Holmes series. I am Alexandria Tan, and you are listening to a very, very special little interview episode to celebrate and wrap up the Sherlock Holmes podcast plays written and directed by Scott McQuaid that we have been producing pretty much since the lockdown started. I'm absolutely thrilled to be sitting here today with some amazing actors from all around the world. They are the main cast of the Sherlock Holmes podcast plays. Why don't we get right into some introductions? Paul, would you like to start first?
Sure. Hi, my name's Paul Zarraga and I play Sherlock Holmes.
So hello, my name's Tom Godfrey and I play Dr. Watson.
Hi, my name is Savira, and I play Irene Adler.
Hello, my name is Luqman Shuaib, and I play Moriarty.
Right, that is everyone. Thank you all for being here today. Let's kick it off into some questions. What was your first introduction to Sherlock Holmes? And Paul, would you like to start first?
Yeah, my first introduction to Sherlock Holmes was The Hound of the Baskervilles, I think. When I was a young chap of about probably 13, I remember watching that with my family, and my father in particular, well, I wouldn't say he was a massive Sherlock Holmes fan, but certainly he liked those old black and white films, and Basil Rathbone was a particular favourite.
Right.
And I can remember being quite frightened by that film, you know, the overall kind of feeling, you know, the fact that it was filmed in black and white in the 30s, the idea that there was this bloodthirsty hound loose on the moors. It just, you know, it really struck a chord. And after that, I, in the 80s, watched Jeremy Brett. And of course, I read the books as well. I was an avid reader. So, I sort of devoured all those Sherlock Holmes stories. But I think Hound of the Baskervilles were the first. And it's been a sort of, perennial favourite. I always go back to it and often rewatch that film. And it still has that same kind of oppressive atmosphere.
Right, that is quite the introduction. Tom, what about you? What was your first introduction to Sherlock Holmes?
I was first introduced to Sherlock Holmes when I was a young child. I remember my dad used to read stories, and one of the stories he read was The Hound of the Baskervilles. And we actually lived quite near Dartmoor in Exeter, and we visited Dartmoor a few times, and I mean, it was a fairly desolate place. So I remember thinking, you know, if you were out here on the moor alone at night and there was a big hound roaming around, that would be petrifying.
Right, so quite a similar introduction. What about you, Savira?
Well, my first introduction to Sherlock Holmes was by the oh-so-dreamy Robert Downey Jr. I'm joking. I don't know him personally, although I'd like to. I thought the films were extremely well put together and well thought out.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
big fan.
Yeah, me too, definitely. Luqman, what about you?
So my first introduction to Sherlock Holmes was obviously when I read the books as a child. I think it started as sort of a graphic novel / comic of The Hound of the Baskervilles. And then I finally read the entire adventures, only to forget them all as the teen years passed. But coming to the plays, of course, it was when I auditioned for Scott McQuaid's comedy production of Sherlock Holmes and The Show Must Go On. So obviously for these audio plays, Scott got in touch with me directly saying that he had a part which he thought I could play, and well, I was game.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it was great to have you as Moriarty. You kind of went into the second question I would like to ask everyone, which is, how did you get involved with this project, the Sherlock Holmes podcast plays? And I think, Luqman, since you started, do you want to continue giving us a little bit more info on how you got involved?
Mm-hmm. So I've worked with Scott before on some of his comedy plays and his productions in the school. We're essentially colleagues there. And so obviously having, worked with each other on theatrical plays, it was just a matter of, him being aware of my spectrum of capabilities and well, offering me the part in one of the audio plays, and how could I say no?
Yeah, I always say yes as well when it comes to Scott's projects, because I love working on projects with Scott. It's always such a thrill. Savira, what about you?
Well, Scott and I collaborated on numerous projects from year 7 at Champaka International School all the way up till graduation. He is the sole reason I got into this profession in the first place, and I owe a great deal of my successes to him. It still sort of feels weird calling you Scott, Mr. Scott. But anyway, we keep in touch till today, and he told me he was working on this wonderful project over quarantine, and I asked if... he asked if I wanted to be a part of it, and I was super excited to accept.
Right, you guys go way back. Paul, how did you become the voice of Sherlock Holmes?
Well, actually, Tom and I were working on a theatre play with Scott's sister, Charlotte, and she mentioned that her brother was casting characters for this series of Sherlock Holmes podcast plays.
Right.
So she gave me a short monologue for a voice audition, just over WhatsApp, actually, which is was a first for me. And then she sent it to Scott. Shortly after, Scott called me and we spoke about the character, the project, and the rest, as they say, is elementary.
So, Tom, you and Paul have worked together before then.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he's the only other person that I know, because he was part of our theatre group as well.
Right, yeah, speech bubbles. This podcast play has really become such a global project, and it's so great to see everyone collaborate on this project from different corners of the world. Let's talk a little bit about the characters that each of you guys play. Can you tell us a little bit about what your approach was like? What was the character development like? Given that, the character will only be portrayed through audio.
I think when I first spoke to Scott, I asked him if he wanted me to do a sort of a Basil Rathbone style Holmes, and he said no, he was more Jeremy Brett. So basically, I sort of binge watched lots of Jeremy Brett and the 1980s series, and based the accent on that. And Scott himself, he's a bit of an avid Holmes man, said that he wanted it, to be as aloof and otherworldly, pompous as possible. So that was my my brief, and I just worked on that. And I think, that is the Holmes character. He is from a different dimension and very removed from reality, if you like, sort of floating above everybody else with this very high IQ and this very sort of dismissive, pompous demeanor. So, as I said, watched lots of Jeremy Brett and based, really kind of, worked on the accent really and the expression in the voice, because obviously it's it's an audio play.
Yeah, you definitely have to work a little harder to get the emotion across and even the demeanor of how your character would stand or walk, and I think that was a very interesting thing to take on in these audio plays. What about you, Tom, with Watson?
Yeah, Dr. Watson, I mean, I'm not sure about character development, but I mean, he clearly is an educated, intellectual, sort of upper middle class person, and quite a snob as well.
Yeah.
And I think his relationship with Sherlock Holmes is what kind of drives the plays, the stories. Because they clearly irritate the hell out of each other. They can't stand each other really, and yet they kind of need each other to make sense of their own lives. I mean, it's interesting in this story, the Black Dahlia, because it becomes very apparent that Dr. Watson is quite interested in sort of fame and fortune, whereas recognition and appreciation is something quite alien to Sherlock Holmes. He just is wrapped up in his own world.
Yeah, it's You're right. You're definitely right. The whole dynamic between Sherlock and Watson is really what drives the story, really, other than the mystery, you know. Savira, oh gosh, I nearly said Sherlock. Savira, what was your approach like to Irene?
For Irene Adler, from the films that I watched, I understood Irene's essence and what her part played in the telling of this, or at least retelling of the story. Obviously, I don't speak for everyone, and everyone's process is different, but at least for me, it wasn't as different as how I would prep any other character I portray. But especially with voice acting, what I found is that you have to make sure to be extremely specific and know who you are, who your character is, back and forth, and know exactly what they intend in communicating, because you don't have the luxury of telling the story with your eyes and or body language. So knowing what you're communicating plays a huge part in the development.
Right, yeah, that might just be the most important part, because the viewers, the listeners only have, you know, your character's voice to base the whole story off on and to know what's going on in the scene, and they have to catch on onto those little nuances in your voice and really get the message just from listening to your character speak. So Luqman, what about you? What was developing Moriarty like?
To get an understanding of how the character of Moriarty had to be portrayed only using audio was a bit of a challenge at first, because I had never actually played him on stage. So I didn't know what sort of, character I could reference. And certainly as far as movies and TV shows go, the few I could find, some of them are cliches, some of them are challenging, some of them we've heard. I wanted to get my own interpretation of Moriarty. So because of that, I just, put myself in his position, tried to understand the rationale, twisted as it was, behind what he was doing, and then the rest of it was to embody the frustration, I guess, that Moriarty has of being surrounded by inferior intellects and having to deal with one superior intellect that always throws off his plans, being, Sherlock Holmes. So, and I sort of channeled that frustration into a, darker place. And, of course, the stiff upper lip and the accent definitely helped.
Yeah, stiff upper lip, that's quite the acting tip. Oh, I didn't mean for that to rhyme. So, Tom, what's different between working on a live theatre show and doing a podcast play?
Yeah, working on a podcast like this is kind of difficult, because you can't, I mean, you're just saying the lines alone into an empty space, into an empty room. So it's quite solitary. And also, of course, you miss the camaraderie of working with other people interacting with other people. I mean, I don't really, apart from Paul, who I knew before, I don't really know anyone who's in the plays. So it's kind of strange in that sense. Although it's been a fantastic distraction. I mean, I've enjoyed doing it. It's something that has added a different kind of novelty to the whole lockdown experience.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's definitely given us something to work on and something to be excited for and look forward to, because we've done 4 episodes of this so far. So it was good for it to keep coming and keep us busy during lockdown. Paul, what about you? What was it like?
Yeah, well, I grew up listening to radio, and it's a medium that I really love. So I've always listened to Radio 4 and Radio 5, the plays on there, The Archers, particularly on Radio 4. When we're in the car, when I'm driving around Istanbul, I listen to the radio on the internet, so I'm listening to plays. And it's just a kind of really relaxing medium. It's not an imposing medium like television, so you can do other stuff whilst you're listening. So that excited me. And then also the chance it gave me to kind of immerse myself in the whole Sherlock Holmes canon, if you like. So rewatching the films, rereading the books, and then trying to come up with my own version of this very sort of alien, pompous and aloof character. I think the other thing that's quite exciting about doing this project is that you never know what it's going to be like. You know,
Yeah.
what's the final play going to be like? Because you're working in isolation. I knew that Tom was Dr. Watson, but I didn't know who was playing the other characters.
Right, yeah.
You know, and also the sound effects. Scott does a wonderful job editing everything together. So
Yeah, he does.
when you finally get the play in your hands, as it were, or a chance to listen to it, it's always wow, you know, amazing, you know, because you know your bit, but you don't know what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it's always a great moment.
Yeah, it's the best. Savira, was this experience a challenging one, or was it a blast?
It was actually really fun. It's really funny because you would think voice acting isn't physical at all because you're either in a box or a booth, or if you're like me, in a closet and eyes aren't on you, so you don't have to be physical, when really it's the opposite.
Yeah.
Sometimes, if not most of the time, I actually find myself physicalizing even more than theater to get more color in my voice. So it was a lot of fun.
Right, yeah. I actually relate to that a lot. I think when I played the babushka lady in the Umbrella Man episode, I found myself, you know, sitting back like she would. She's this Russian, you know, sexy lady, and I found myself, you know, kind of sitting back like she would and trying to get her demeanor just right. And she smokes, so I had a imaginary cigarette between my fingers, and it did help. It really did. And you don't have to worry about looking stupid either, because no one's gonna see you. In fact, go more, and you know, it might come out in your voice. So we talked a little bit about how this podcast play is such a global project, and you guys are obviously based in, you know, such different parts of the world. What were some challenges that you faced when it came to recording in isolation by yourself, and acting without another actor present to work off of?
It's funny because the challenge to me wasn't recording with no actor to work off of.
Okay.
The challenge was recording when your place is next to a busy street and you have to time out when traffic decides to be louder
Right.
than it normally is to disrupt your recording session. So it was a little difficult in that aspect. But as far as working off of an actor, I didn't find it as difficult as I thought. And the reason why is because to me, imagination is an actor's best friend. I feel like in all mediums of acting, whether you're on stage, film, TV, or voice acting, it is our job to imagine parts of our world.
Yeah.
Kind of like when you're on stage and you have to pretend the fourth wall is a view of Paris and
Right.
it's snowing, when in reality you're in a theater in Malaysia and it's hot and there are a bunch of people gawking at you with, you know, mom up front with her camcorder pointed at you. Do people even have camcorders anymore?
Do.
Or in film, when you're in front of a green screen in a studio with wires, cranes, and cameras surrounding you, but you got to somehow believe you're surrounded by trees and there's a dragon that's caught your eye flying straight at you and you're running for your life, you know? So voice acting is, to me, kind of the same thing. I just had to be extremely clear about who I was talking to and imagine him.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I'd say imagination played a big part in, you know, the podcast coming together and us actors being able to do our acting, you know, alone in isolation without anyone around. Paul, what was it like not being able to, you know, work with another actor across from you?
I mean, not working with other actors was a challenge, actually, because, yeah, as I said, you're working in isolation, and obviously you read the play beforehand, and you've got, you know, you're reacting to the lines before you and the situation that you're in. But when you're working on a live play, you're working off another actor, you know, their body language, facial expressions, and you're reacting accordingly. And you don't have that opportunity. And also, the other thing is that you don't record it all in one go. I mean, I was doing it in 2, 3, 4 sittings.
Right, yep.
And then Scott would send through bits he wanted re-recording. And it's very hard to get back into the same level or the same pitch or the same delivery sometimes, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
So that was
So
hard.
it does, and it'll definitely be quite obvious in the final cut as well. So we had to be quite careful.
yeah, it's a challenge, definitely a challenge.
Yeah, for sure. And the whole like acting is reacting thing, I think it was really hard to apply that when it came to recording the podcast.
Yeah, it's not easy not being able to react to somebody else's lines. I mean, basically what I do is I just kind of read the story and imagine everybody else speaking in my head, and then reply to what I've imagined they've said
Right.
and how they've said it, and then hope that it turns out all right, and kind of rely on the director to let us know if it doesn't.
Yeah, and we have to put maybe even more trust in the director than usual, given that, you know, we're in these lockdown circumstances and there's no actor present for any interaction. You know, talking about all the difficulties and everything we've been facing with the podcast play, let's talk a little bit more about the 5 different plays in this series. Which one proved to be the most difficult for you all?
So out of the 5 plays, I took part only in 2 of them, and out of those, I would say that I found the Wolves in Exile more challenging. But I'm also worried that explaining why I found it challenging would spoil a bit of the play for those who haven't seen it yet. So I'm going to hold back and just say that I think it was mainly putting the character of Moriarty into that time in human history to play a character who is from that historic faction is or was the real challenge.
Right. That's interesting. And good on you for not spoiling the episode. Everyone listening in right now can go ahead and listen to our Sherlock Holmes podcast plays. They are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor.fm, and YouTube for the ones who prefer a little bit of visual aid. Savira, what about you? I think you also did 2 episodes as Irene Adler, if I'm not mistaken, which was the hardest episode to do.
To be completely honest, I think Lincoln's Gun was the hardest one for me. The accent was definitely wigging me out because all of a sudden it's set in the West, you know, and I didn't want Irene to be completely different than who she was. But Scott did say I needed to have a little twang.
Ooh, fun.
And I didn't know how far to go with it. You know what I mean? I didn't want to be like, hi, my name's Irene Adler.
Yeah. I think I too struggled with accents because the 2 characters that I played, one had a Russian accent and the other one was American, but it had to be muddled and it kind of had to be very specific because I was playing a real person, Elizabeth Short, aka the Black Dahlia, and I think we all at one point struggled with our accents. Paul, obviously you were in all of the episodes. Was there one that was particularly difficult?
Yeah, I think the first one was the most difficult for me. Ripper Street. Actually, there were 2. Ripper Street because it was the first, and I was just trying to come to terms with the role and how I wanted it to sound. You know, everyone knows Sherlock Holmes. You know that he's this pompous, aloof, otherworldly character who can be quite cruel, particularly in his relationship with Dr. Watson. You know, he's very scathing and sarcastic.
Yeah.
And so just trying to get that right, or get it as I would like it to be. And I started off, and as I went through the play, I had to go back and redo because I wasn't happy. But as I went through the plays, it became easier. I got it to how I wanted it to be. So that first one, because it was the first, and the other play that I found a little bit of a challenge was the Wolves in Exile with the accent, not the accents, the languages,
Right.
Or the accents, I suppose, as well.
Yep.
So Spanish wasn't too bad. Actually, my family, my grandfather's from Spain, so that shouldn't have been too difficult. But German. I wasn't too good at the German, I don't think. And I think Scott made me redo those a few times to make it sound, because he told me that Holmes would definitely be an expert in languages, because he's an expert in everything.
Yeah.
Tom, much better than me. I think he's got a gift for languages, whereas I struggled a bit. So yeah, those two.
Right. The languages and accents strike again. So the fifth and final Sherlock adventure is about to be released next week, The Black Dahlia. Sherlock, why don't you tell us a little bit about what we can expect from this crime story?
Yeah, The Black Dahlia. Well, I knew this story actually because I went through a period where I was reading a lot of crime fiction. And this is a dark play, actually, the darkest of, well, maybe Ripper Street was too, but The Black Dahlia, I don't know. When I read the book, the James Elroy book, I found it quite heavy going and a dark read. And I know that Scott did a lot of research for this because we spoke about it. And I know, for example, that he was in contact with the son of one of the main characters in the play. I'm not going to mention any names because I don't want to spoil the story for those who don't know it. But yeah, it's a great play, but dark, very dark.
Yes, very dark indeed. Well, I hope that built some anticipation for you listeners. The episode Sherlock Holmes in The Black Dahlia will be coming out on the 28th of November 2020, and you can listen to that on Pop-Up Theatre's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor.fm, and of course YouTube. You can also follow us on Instagram at popup_theater, and that's where we post all our updates, so you can know exactly when the episode is coming out. So now we have a little interesting segment, if you will. We have some listeners on the line right now with some questions for you guys. The first listener calling in is Teresa from the UK. There we go. Hello, Teresa.
Oh, hi, Alex. I have a question for Tom. Watson features a character in the story, but he also narrates it. Just wanted to ask you, did you find it difficult to bounce in and out of the scenes from being the storyteller to the actual actor?
Well, no, I don't. Actually, I think, if anything, it was an advantage because Watson spends a lot of time being kind of amazed and confused, dumbfounded in the dialogue. And then the narration, of course, is the opposite. So this is his story. He's written it, so he's an authority. So that you can change the tone and become much more sort of confident and authoritative.
Right, yeah. Thank you for that question, Teresa. Our next caller in is Elmi from Malaysia. Elmi, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm calling in to ask Mr. Luqman a question. So how does it feel to be acting in such a different environment as to what you've done on stage with theater, being able to act with people from different parts of the world?
I mean, it's different, but it's also very much fun. And it works very well for somebody who, at the time of recording these, had a really tight schedule. So I want to thank Scott for considering me for a part that is small and only requiring me to appear in 2 plays. Obviously, I have to give credit to the other actors for putting in a lot of the heavy lifting. But suffice it to say that it's been a real honor.
Yeah, I think we all are. Thank you for calling in, Elmi. The next listener on the line is Ed from Australia. Hello?
G'day, Alex. This is a question for Paul. Old London and Sherlock go hand in hand. So when you played the character in different eras, did he change at all?
Yeah, definitely. As you say, Ed, I think, Sherlock Holmes and Old London do, walk hand in hand. But I think what's interesting about these plays is Sherlock Holmes finding himself in these disparate situations, out of his comfort zone. I think he's ostensibly the same character. He's this very aloof, distant, intelligent, cruel character who, intolerant, who doesn't seem to like his fellow man. But what's interesting for me, and I think that's what Scott intended, was to it was how people reacted to him. So you find him verbally jousting with people like Howard Hughes, with the LA police force, with 1960s policemen trying to solve the John F. K murder. So that's what's interesting. He's a sort of man out of time and out of place, and it's him reacting and being reacted to. So yeah, I didn't change the character in any way. I delivered as a sort of traditional Sherlock Holmes performance, the Sherlock that we know and love, hopefully.
Well, yes, that was a great question. Thank you for that, Ed. Our next caller in is a Charmaine from Malaysia. Charmaine, go ahead.
Hey everyone, hope everyone's doing well. My question is for Savira. Because you played the role of Irene Adler in both Sherlock audio plays, Lincoln's Gun and Ripper Street, what was the key factor, element, or characteristic you focused on to distinguish between the two Adlers during your development process?
Hello, Charmaine. Thank you for your question. From what I understood from it, if I'm getting this right, the key factor or characteristics that were similar between the two Adlers in my approach was, I guess, just playing around with the sensuality and confidence she has to be able to manipulate her way into getting what she wants, especially during the time period she was in. It was an extremely horrifying and immensely difficult time for women. They had no rights, so she uses her confidence for survival. And by what she's proven time and time again, she's able to use her schemes to gain power over the people she deems fit to help maneuver her way in a man's world. I loved playing with that aspect of power, so it's just playing around with that, I hope that answers your question.
Yep. Thank you, Charmaine. We hope you're doing well too. Our last question is from Howard Ostrom, the author of the Sherlock Holmes on Screen series. Howard, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, I have a few questions for each of the performers. Paul is Sherlock, Tom is Watson, Savira is Irene, and Luqman is Moriarty. First, if you were the quality of your character, what would it be? And secondly, if you were a fault of your character, what would it be?
Wow, thanks for that, Howard. That's a difficult one. Let me think. So quality, possibly that I'm a perfectionist, a bit like Sherlock and if a job's worth doing properly, I have to do it properly. And if I feel that I've, not met expectations, and I'm kind of racked with self-criticism, self-doubt. But if it was a fault, I suppose I'm a bit antisocial, maybe not maybe selectively social. In that I do like the company of other people, but I do like my own space and being on my own. And in The Umbrella Man, Sherlock Holmes testifies to that. He says, he doesn't like people. It sounds like his worst nightmare. He doesn't want to go to the ball, but actually ends up going. But, he expresses that. He's, sort of a man estranged. So I hope that answers the question. Thanks, Howard.
Tom, would you like to go next?
If I were a quality of Dr. Watson, the first thing that comes to my mind is his loyalty. Obviously, his loyalty to Sherlock Holmes is strong, almost to a devotion. But he does value friends and friendship, and you can see that with Mrs. Hudson and to a certain extent Lestrade. So I think he's loyal. In terms of faults, what comes to mind with Watson is he's judgmental. He kind of leaps to judgments. So he does have an element of kind of snobbery about him.
Right. Savira, on to you.
Thank you, Mr. Ostrom. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, but this is a fun question. If I were a quality of my character, I'd say ambitious. Yep, I'd say ambitious because if I know what I want, I will get it. No matter how hard it may be, no one can stop me. I will get what I want. If I were a fault of my character, you know what? I'd say the manipulation factor. A while ago, I've had my fair share. That's all I'm going to say. Hope that answers your question.
Yep. All right. And that leaves Luqman. Go ahead.
Character traits. Let's see. I think with Professor Moriarty, what I love about him is his unwavering tenacity. The man has this ability to commit to some rather ridiculous goals and follow through. That is not something I'm capable of doing, but I aspire to do. I mean, as far as faults go, I think I'm a bit of a control freak, kind of like James Moriarty. Good thing I'm a school teacher. Oh wait, no, bad thing I'm a school teacher. No, I'm not so sure anymore. I think, yeah, to an extent, I like having control of a situation. Or, for example, I don't like it when my plans get foiled because I'm one of those plan people. But, yeah, I mean, there are some things you can't predict. So, at least, I think I'm grateful that I'm not as bad as Moriarty. I think any character traits that Moriarty has, whether positive or negative, would be extreme versions of what I have. So, I think it's safe to say that while I understand where he's coming from, I know exactly when to stop. So, yes, that's it. Thank you very much for that question, by the way.
Yep. Thank you so much, Howard. If anybody is interested in seeing all the people that have ever played Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson on stage, screen, or audio, then you can purchase Howard's book, Sherlock Holmes on Screen, at his website, sherlockians.com. I believe that Paul and Tom are also documented in Howard's book. Am I right, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that brings us to the end of this interview episode. Thank you all so much for being here and taking time out of your day or night, whatever time it may be over there, to do this.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. No, thank you for having me.
And don't forget, everybody, the 5th and final Sherlock Holmes podcast play will be out on the 28th of November 2020, and that will be available on all streaming platforms. To stay updated, you can follow us on Instagram at popup_theater. And of course, thank you so much for listening. We hope that you found this little interview episode interesting, and we will see you real soon.